The biblical account of Israel's war against the Midianites in the book of Numbers, chapter 31, has prompted scholarly debates due to its unseemingly unhistorical features. Some critics regard the narrative as midrash to illustrate legal and religious themes rather than a record of actual events pointing to the following issues. Number one, the improbable annihilation of the Midianites. It is said that they were completely destroyed, yet they reappear in later texts, like in the book of Judges. Two, there's also zero Israelite casualties. Despite being a major battle, not one Israelite dies. Three is the enormous spoils of war. The listed plunder in today's standards would be somewhere around $250 million, a staggering and arguably legendary amount for a Bronze Age conflict. Nevertheless, other scholars argue for a historical core within the narrative. There's the ancient geopolitical references that align with extra biblical data, and also authentic names, military tactics, and legal customs that supports the narrative's antiquity. Therefore, while the numbers likely reflect hyperbolic and legendary embellishment, and the Midianites may not have been completely annihilated, the account likely preserves a real conflict between Israel and a dominant regional power. The literary exaggeration underscores the theological and moral significance of the event, framing it as a divinely sanctioned holy war rather than mere military conquest. This is a very hard to read text, and it is harder even to explain. We have heard the common phrase, "There is nothing civil about war." But what about "there is nothing holy about war"? Can a war ever be holy? Can vengeance ever be just? God calls it vengeance for the Israelites, while Moses later calls it God's vengeance. And Rashi comments, both are true. An attack on Israel is also an offense against God. But that very shift in language from national to divine invites reflection. Is this truly vengeance or is it justice? Can it be both? The sages of our tradition were aware of the discomfort surrounding this narrative. And as we reflect on this ancient and unsettling account, we are inevitably drawn to deeper questions, not only about the war against Midian, but about the very nature of warfare itself. What does it mean to take up arms in the name of justice, of survival, of God? Can war ever be waged without losing part of our moral clarity? These questions do not belong only in the wilderness of the Torah. They belong in the present. They follow us today into the lived experience of the modern state of Israel, where the challenges of defense, power, and conscience continue to test the soul of the Jewish people, a people committed both to survival and sanctity. Israeli soldiers face enemies who embed themselves among civilians, use the language of martyrdom to mask terror, and count on the moral hesitation of their opponents. What happens when the lines between combatant and non-combatant are deliberately blurred? Some reports of the war in Gaza may be exaggerated, echoing the hyperbolic accounts of the spoils of war against Midian. But the war itself is painfully real, and so too are its consequences, the toll it takes on the souls of soldiers, and the deepening wounds to Israel's moral standing and the Jewish people's reputation in the eyes of the world. Also, Israel's military strength and technological superiority create a significant power imbalance, and this advantage brings its own ethical challenges. How to wield such power with responsibility, to minimize harm and act with restraint. As the war in Gaza and broader threats to Israel from Iran and its proxies unfold before our own eyes, we are left asking, What does it mean to defend life while holding fast to moral conscience? How do we grieve the necessity of war without succumbing to hatred? How do we distinguish nekama, vengeance, from mishpat, justice? In an age of asymmetric warfare, how do we preserve our moral clarity during conflict? Judaism does not sanctify violence, even when war is permitted. Whether by divine command in the Bible or by self-defense, it is always accompanied by boundaries, by halachic constraints and moral caution. According to Maimonides, even in obligatory wars, peace must be offered first. Civilians must be spared whenever possible. Even trees must not be destroyed unnecessarily. We face not only external threats, but internal challenges. So many questions. How do we remain compassionate while resolute? How do we allow ourselves to feel sorrow for the suffering of innocents, even on the other side, without weakening our defense of what is right? The Torah does not give us easy answers. In fact, it seems deliberate to discomfort us. Moses does not celebrate this war. He expresses anger, not triumph, furious that the Israelites spared the Midianite women who, according to the text, had been instrumental in leading Israel into idolatry and immorality at Baal Peor. In his eyes, the very ones who caused the spiritual downfall of the people were allowed to live, while the mission had been one of divine retribution. But even in the aftermath, there is no rejoicing, there is only silence and the sobering process of purification. Soldiers are required to remain outside the holy camp for 7 days, ritually cleaning themselves and their captives. And every object of war, metal, cloth, tools, they must all be purified. Human lives and human souls must be sorted. This is not a glorious victory parade. It's a scene of tension, a reckoning. It has moral ambiguity, perhaps a refusal to turn violence into virtue. Hasidic thinkers push the conversation further into the spiritual realm. The war against Midian is not just a physical conflict, but a metaphor for an inner struggle. The name Midian comes from Madon, strife. Midian represents internal fragmentation, duplicity, disunity. In that sense, the battle is not only against an external enemy, but against the forces of divisions that live within each of us. And when the warriors return, when we are told that their vessels, their clothes, their weapons, and their cookware must be purified, and this is interpreted as a symbolic and even in a divinely sanctioned war, even when victory is achieved, the human soul must be cleansed. No one goes to war and comes back untouched. The external vessels must be purified, yes, but even more so, the internal ones. This is part of the Torah's moral genius. It records the command to go to war, but also insists in the aftermath of cleansing. It acknowledges the complexity and emotional and spiritual toll of war. As Jews, we are commanded to remember Amalek, now to remember the destruction of the temples and the exile and all of the wars and catastrophes that have fallen upon us, especially as we approach Tisha B'Av, a day that calls us to mourn and reflect on the fragility of peace and the heavy cost of conflict. But we're also commanded to remember who we really are, that we're a people who love peace, who pray for compassion, and who believe that every human being is created in the image of God. The Torah portion of Matot forces us to look into the mirror. It does not offer clear resolution, but it demands that we ask, when work becomes necessary, how do we return home? What do we carry with us? What must be left behind? In every war, ancient or modern, there is also an inner war, a struggle. to remain human. May we, as a people, as a state, and as individuals, always strive to wage that inner war with courage and conscience. And may we continue to pray and work for the day when swords are turned into plowshares and peace will finally prevail.